Student Diversity and Inclusion Initiatives with the BASE program here at Humber College. I'd like to just take this opportunity to welcome you, each and every one of you, staff, faculty, students, members of the community at large. I'd like to welcome you to our very first installment of our Fireside Chat Series. It is a joint partnership with Lakeshore Grounds Interpretive Centre along with the BASE, and the BASE stands for the Black Academic Success and Engagement Programs at Humber College. To begin, I would like to do a land acknowledgement. Humber College is located within the traditional and treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit, known as Etobicoke, the place of the Black Elders, in the Michisaugee language. The region is uniquely situated along Humber River watershed, which historically has provided an integral connection for the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples between the Ontario Lakeshore and the Lake Simcoe, Georgian Bay regions. It is now home to people of numerous nations. Etobicoke continues to provide a vital source of interconnection for all. If I'm to look at myself and consider some of the privileges that I carry, along with just taking account some of the opportunities that I'm afforded, and if you were to do the same, I think we can all agree that indeed it is a privilege to be on a land that continues to provide a vital source of interconnection for each and every one of us. I'd like to share some best practices with you so that you're able to really enjoy this event. It is a live event, so please know that it is being recorded. We encourage everyone to participate in the live chat box throughout the session. And at the end of the fire chat discussion, there will be an open Q&A. So keep those questions coming. If you have any questions during the presentation, type them in the chat and we will do our best to get to them. Before we bring on our guest for this evening, which I'm really excited about, I'd like to introduce to you our facilitator for our discussion. There's a quote that says, "Never lose sight of your long-term goals. With an elevated perspective, you will have the patience and clarity to reach almost any objective." And this is echoed by the author Robert A. Greene. This quote embodies the philosophy of Lionel Campbell. He is a fourth-year student enrolled in the Bachelor of Commerce International Business program. He is involved in many Black community development programs, which supports Black-owned businesses in becoming more competitive in the market, as well as one-to-one mentorship programs in the region of North York, Toronto. He is a recipient of the Bachelor of Commerce International Business Leadership Award. Lionel exercises his leadership skills while working with the BASE in creating programming to engage in other Black students, and uses his gift of public speaking to inspire those around him, such as moderating the 2021 Black Excellence Conference for the BASE and Ignite, and now as our facilitator for tonight's conversation. Please welcome Lionel Campbell.
Thank you so much, Monique, for your kind words of introduction. The privilege is mine to introduce our guest speaker for today, Natasha Henry, who is the president of Ontario History Society, a Ph.D. candidate and an accomplished author of 5 books, a Black history curriculum consultant. She has researched and produced numerous resources that highlight the African Diasporic experience, including multiple articles for the Candian Encyclopedia. She is the recipient of the 2014 Gold Medal Moonbeam Children Award for Multicultural Nonfiction. Natasha offers a variety of educational programs designed to enrich the learning experience for the students through informative and interactive workshops that will assist them in uncovering Black history through an array of engaging activities. Natasha has dedicated over 16 years of her life to promoting programs that focus on education, inclusion, diversity, and equity. I present to you Natasha Henry.
Thank you so much, Lionel, and good afternoon, everyone. I am so pleased to be with you here today as part of this Fireside Chat series and to be one of the inaugural guests, so thank you.
Thank you, Natasha, for accepting our invitation. So, Natasha, you have a pretty impressive background of over 16 years as a historian. You're actually going back for your PhD. Share with the audience what sparked your passion for history.
Thanks for that first question in our conversation, Lionel. For me, my passion really began with my pursuit of understanding myself and understanding um, the context of Black Canadian presence. And so when I was just going into high school, I thought it started to have, these questions around, um, you know, we'd talk about what we would call like Black Canada, like, where were Black people? Where do they live? How long have they been here? I'm a child, I was born here, a child of parents from Jamaica. And so as a child of immigrants, was aware of the more recent arrival, if you will, of people from the Caribbean, but had questions about, how long Black people had been in Canada. And so that led me to read and research, attend events to learn more. And I just became so intrigued with that history. And I found that, and in hindsight, I can now say that the more that I learned about that history, that I was learning more about myself and situating myself as someone born and raised in Canada in a space that's often, defined as a white majority space. And so with that, that continued throughout my high school years, and then I went on to seek employment in programs that supported Black focused programming for Black children, summer programs. I helped to co-develop a summer program in the Lawrence Heights area, the African Youth Summer Program. And then in pursuing my post-secondary pursuits, I knew I wanted to become an educator, and knew that I wanted to somehow continue my examination of Black history, African history, and learned that at York University I could pursue a degree in African studies. And so I attended York University doing a combined degree in education, and then my bachelor in anthropology and history. And so for me, it really has been this pursuit of situating myself in Canada. And then as an educator, for me, doing work so that students like myself can actually have a space in the classroom in order to do that kind of examination and learning.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's what are your thoughts on the call to shift towards Black History Month versus, I should say, Black Heritage Month versus Black History Month to better reflect the whole lived experience of the African, say, Caribbean Black community versus a focus on enslavement?
Mhm. Well, Black history is not just a focus on enslavement, and it's not supposed to be. I think an unfortunate thing is that it's often framed in that manner, and even positioning the history of enslavement solely as Black history when it's not the history of Black people, um, which I can talk about in a little bit. It's an evolution of language, but at the core, the foundation remains the same in terms of understanding and appreciating and documenting the experiences of people of African descent. And those experiences, for me, encompass history, heritage, culture. And so following the framework that was set out by Dr. Carter G. Woodson in the way that it was intended, um, encompasses all of that. And so just keeping in mind that at the onset of what he started as Negro History Week, that there has been over time since the 1920s, this evolution of the language. But again, I think the core element is what's important to maintain that. And so we see the different wording around, for example, African Heritage Month, African History Month, Black History Month, Black Heritage Month. And so it's all about our conversation around our identities or defining Blackness and Africanness, and that's healthy for us to engage in that. And for me, it's just, again, just remaining committed to the origins and to, you know, to the core goals of the occasion. And it was intended that throughout the year that people learn about and teach about the experiences of people of African descent and come together at this one designated time to share and to highlight what was covered throughout the year. It wasn't intended for it to be how it's taken up today in terms of cramming everything in the 29 or 29 days, if it's a leap year, and then not throughout the rest of the year.
Absolutely. And so you are a strong advocate for bringing more Black history into Ontario education curriculum. Before we talk about the importance of those voices being included in history that we teach, let me ask you, what was your first, let me ask you about the first, about how you refrain from learning about history, you know, for those who think that history is boring. You know, a lot of people, they don't want to go into history because they think it is boring. How do you change that narrative?
Yes, and it depends on, I think, how they've encountered history. Sometimes people have encountered it just as reciting facts and dates. And for me, exploring history is about exploring people and their lives, particular contexts, perspectives. And so in approaching it in that way, for me anyhow, I think it's quite engaging. And so the dates and you know, some of the particular facts just instantly become part of the learning when you reframe it in that way, and approach it in a way that helps people to think critically about our place, our country, our communities, even why we're here today. You know, why some people are in particular places that we're in today has a historical origin to that. And so if we and if we can look at history as, yes, being very much in the past, but history is today, is also in the present as well. And so for me, making all of those connections, I think makes history more relevant and more engaging for people.
Okay. So I think that should be enough to sort of, you know, make a shift in, you know, how we view history, especially students.
And also, yeah, and just to add to that quickly, it's also for me about including and recognizing different experiences and different voices, and troubling, if you will, the way that history is approached as very Eurocentric and very male dominated. And so bringing in some other kinds of stories, other experiences, looking at other or thinking differently about historical evidence, how we come to know this history is also, all of those things are important. And so, you know, for me, that has led me to thinking about that very specifically about Black Canadian history.
Absolutely. Okay, there is a great deal of focus on the United States when it comes to Black history. What steps can be taken on an individual or, say, institutional level to broaden the scope of our understanding of Black history beyond the perspective of the United States? And what is the commonly misunderstanding about Canadian Black history?
Well, first, I think that, and part of the work that I do as an educator and as a historian, is give primacy to the Black Canadian experiences. Because this is, for me, it's where I was born and raised, it's where, you know, where we are. This is the space that we have to navigate, whether it's an actual physical or geographical space, political space, economic space. And so for me, that history helps us to make sense of and navigate those spaces and understand that and orient ourselves in that space. And then connect that to the broader African diaspora. And for me, I think that's the, the order that things should take. And just, generally speaking, that, that's important, because one of the things, to touch on the second part of your question, one of the common misnomers is that people of African descent are just more recent arrivals to what we now call Canada. And so people don't recognize that there is a 400-year presence of people of African descent here in Canada. And that makes a difference in your understanding of space and politics and economics when you can understand that long history, as opposed to thinking that people of African descent just came in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And so it's important for me, again, and then going back to our very first question, thinking about young people who are born and raised here or who immigrated here as young children, and how important that is in your grounding of your sense of self and sense of place, in order for you to understand and make connections to ancestors in some form, to the space that you reside in.
Okay. All right. Could you provide some background regarding your 2010 book, Emancipation Day, in light of the private member bill M36, which was passed 5 days ago, to formally recognize the abolition of the practice of enslaving people from the African continent by the federal government of Canada? It's an exciting time. How do you feel? Tell me more.
Yes, it's really great to see that come to fruition. It's been in the making for a long time. There are a lot of people who have advocated for the recognition of August 1st as Emancipation Day, municipally, at the municipal level, provincially, and of course, as we're talking about federally, with the bill M36. And so it's great to see that come to bear. And I feel honored that I actually contributed to people's better understanding of this history with my book on the history of Emancipation Day celebrations in Canada. And so when I wrote the book in 2010, it was my first book, and it was a project that we discussed with the then publishers, Natural Heritage Books, and it was really a huge learning curve for me because I hadn't known about this history at all. So again, getting back to my parents who are from Jamaica, I knew of the history, of Emancipation Day celebrations in Jamaica, in the Caribbean, but had no idea that this tradition existed in Canada. And so it was, for me, being able to go through this process of learning and researching and documenting this, and then for that book to help to educate and document this history, this rich history. And I mean, I'm not the first, but first in the sense that in such a comprehensive way with a sole focus on Canada. Really, for me now, it's a book that is very dear to my heart as my first book, as a huge contribution to Black Canadian history and experiences. And it looks at the formation and the evolution of this cultural tradition of marking August 1st across Canada at different points in time. I unpack how this tradition formed and what some of the elements of the tradition is, including church services, parades in the streets, having speakers, protesting, unpacking the history of enslavement in Canada, which we now call Canada, but which was then, formerly French and British colonies, because the Slavery Abolition Act that was passed effective August 1st, 1834, encompassed most British colonies, and it looked differently in different places. So we know that in some places in the Caribbean, it still led to the exploitation of the labor of those who were enslaved, because they transitioned from being enslaved to being apprentices for those who enslaved them for another 4 years in some places. And so they really weren't even free until August 1st, 1838. Here in Canada, within that context, it was the gradual abolition of enslavement was taking place, and this legislation really closed off that institution that existed for 206 years here in Canada. And so on August 1st, 1834, celebrations started here in Canada. And so from then coming into 2020 with the Ontario Black History Society, for example, and other organizations who continue to mark Emancipation Day in some way. And so it really is a fulsome history, because it's not just about marking that day. That day was just the beginning of a long pursuit of freedom and liberation and racial justice for Black people. And all of that is woven into the commemoration of Emancipation Day celebrations. And I try to capture that in my book when I examine the celebration in different communities across Canada.
Wow. I'm just thinking, why so long though? Why did it take the government so long to formally recognize it, in your opinion? It's been there for some time.
There's procedural things that have taken place. So more recently, so previous to M36, Dr. Senator Wanda Thomas Bernard had put forth a bill, and it was going to go to final reading, and then an election was called, and so any bills not passed, they die and they have to start over. So there's that kind of procedural thing that took place. And then I think as well, another contributing factor was there wasn't necessarily a strong will per se to actually to get it done, right? Or there wasn't this necessary immediacy, but things have changed over the course of now almost 2 years, as you know, and I'm sure we'll talk about it a bit more, where in reckoning with and confronting our history of enslavement, of anti-Black racism, critique in terms of how the International Decade has been taken up or not taken up, that all of those kind of culminated to add to and push, this issue to actually see it through, to get the politicians to see it through. And so I think, it's long overdue, but the timing was right. And so it's a little bit of both. And so it's great to see that that Emancipation Day will be recognized across the country. But it's not just about the recognition. I think it also calls on us to say that understanding this historical context, see, we get back to history, right? So understanding this history, what does that mean for us today? What does it call on us to do? So we can definitely commemorate and come together on August 1st, but we should be following the model of previous Emancipation Days, of using it for a platform to continue to advance the cause of racial justice and social justice in Canada. And so for me, it's not just about the optics of it, and it doesn't signify at the end, the signature and the passing doesn't mean that this is an end, but it's another stage in our continuing efforts.
Well said. Over the time span of your career, you have been able to accomplish a lot of things. But what would you regard as your greatest achievement in academia to date, and why?
That's a tough one. For me, I'm broaden it to, okay, I'll answer in regards to academia, but I also will extend the borders there. For me, it's an accomplishment for me to contribute to documenting and sharing Black Canadian voices, and making it accessible for young people. I find that for me, that's a huge accomplishment. And so when I can hear from students or educators and they say, well, I didn't know about this story, or You know, they have so many questions to ask. It really, for me, signifies that I have achieved something. I was just on a virtual presentation with a school in Nova Scotia yesterday, and I'm thinking, wow, here I am talking to students in Nova Scotia, and they're asking me these questions, and I just feel so motivated to know that here these young people want to listen to me and ask me questions. So for me, that is a sense of accomplishment there. So it's both of those things, contributing to this field of documenting and recording Black history for posterity in different ways, in books, in videos, in online exhibits. And so I feel blessed to be able to do that and to continue the work of many people, not just academics, but community people, mothers and fathers and aunts who have but committed themselves to archiving pictures and letters and documents that enable people like myself to do the work that I do. So for me to be part of that and to help to amplify that, for me, is a strong sense of accomplishment as well.
Oh, this it leads great in the transitioning to our next question, which is history is being made every day.
Mm.
Do you have any insights or suggestions on what steps we as individuals can take to ensure that we continue to document and preserve our history?
Mhm. Yes, and that is a great question, because for myself, as someone who's passionate about history, as the president of the Ontario Black History Society, who was formed 43 years ago because of the concern around disseminating and preserving Black history, um, and then recognizing that traditional archives, as colonial archives, have not prioritized preserving and conserving, um, you know, things related to Black experiences and Black histories. And so that work is, that context then makes it even more important for us to do many different things in order to contribute to preserving that. One of the first things that I would say is it's important for us to interview our elders in our families, the older folks in our families, record, have a conversation, record these stories, and then hopefully write them down. Our elders are a wealth of information and their experiences. You know, I'm always struck by, you know, just having a conversation with my mother, for example, and she will just say, "Oh yeah, such and such happened," and I was like, "What? I didn't know that this happened. Like, how did I not know?" This is like, you know, now through my lens, it's like this is like a rich nugget of history. And so, interviewing, you know, some of our elders in our community, documenting that history is important. We have smartphones, we can take pictures, you know, and that's another way of archiving as well, and preserving history. So those are a couple of things that we can do. We're able to write blogs, create websites. If you have documents in your family, uh, try to scan them and digitize them. That helps to preserve these records for your family, and should you wish to, you know, to share in any other way. But those are some of the things that we can and should be doing in order to help to preserve our family histories, and then hopefully too, by extension, contributing to cataloging, and sharing and the rich experiences of Black people in Canada.
Okay, so we can do our part.
Absolutely.
We can.
It's not just the historian or the archivist, or we are all, you know, we're all historians. We can all document our personal histories. Some people will even say, you know, keep a diary or a journal or something, you know, you know, you have your own documentation of your notes, and make notes and reflections of, um, you know, parts of your life or things that you experience or witness, the time periods or moments that we're in. Those all are all things that in the future, somebody wanting to examine, well, I don't know what happened in 2020. These are the kinds of things that people will look for, but more importantly, that you can have that for your family.
Absolutely, absolutely. So history serves as a guide. It helps us to navigate through the present. As a historian, what lessons can we learn from the past to redress the issues faced by racialized students in the current day?
History gives us the context. It helps us to establish patterns. It helps us to establish a cause, if you will. And so your question specifically around racialized students, I'll say here specifically Black students, that, in my blended role as educator and historian, that the history of the experiences of Black students and Black families in the educational system really is not well known. And so when we are today having conversations around anti-Black racism, that this is and has been in existence since the formation of public education going back to the early 1800s. And not many people know that here in Ontario that there were racially segregated schools, that schools were established by white majority communities when the numbers of Black residents increased to exclude Black children from schools. Because of whatever those racial fears that they may have had, and again contextualizing it in the time period, and so that has a historical origin that we can trace through to today. And so when we can understand that history, we can understand that the experiences of racial disadvantage, disproportionate outcomes as it relates to Black students, as it relates to the engagement or lack of engagement with Black families, that there is a long practice of that. And so that, I think, helps to us to, that information then helps us to better be prepared to address and to identify the issues and to point to how to address these issues today. And so that's important. It's also important in terms of documenting and seeing very clearly a long history of advocacy by Black parents in order to address what today we call anti-Black racism in public education. The eradication of racially segregated schools and some of the measures that we've seen implemented has been as a result of the activism of Black parents, or else things would have essentially remained status quo from a couple of hundred years ago. So that advocacy of Black parents is crucial for us to understand and to appreciate so that we can continue to build on their efforts as well. And so that could look like academic streaming. So we have conversations today around the streaming of Black students, Black students being overrepresented, for example, in special education and in applied and locally developed courses, less represented in academic courses and gifted classes, the graduation rates. All of these things have a historical beginning. And it's important for us to understand that and acknowledge that as we move forward to continue to address those issues.
Absolutely. What advice do you give to the parents, though, to start this process of changing the patterns? What advice do you give them? They might not know how to start. It is there. How do they get started?
There are several things. From a parent perspective, is understanding that there are some systemic things that have always been in place. If we can understand that history, so understanding the systemic nature of of some of the things that take place is important. But then also as a parent, that means paying very close attention to what your child is learning. Establishing connections and contact with teachers, raising questions if you have questions of the teacher, and looking at, for example, other educators who also play a role in your child's education. So the vice principals, principals, superintendents, the school boards, your trustee as well, who, people who we elect to represent, represent us, right, in public education. So being aware of those, making connection to parent groups. There's always been parent groups, and this, now there are several parent groups focused on either racialized parents or Black parents who are doing tremendous work in helping to provide support, guidance, and advocacy in addressing some of the things that Black children may face. I will also say, just so building that community and being part of that community is important as well. And understanding that while public education or schooling is important, it is one form of education for our children. And there are many other opportunities that we can and should be accessing in order to ensure that our children have rich experiences in order for them to continue to grow and develop. And so while yes, we absolutely have to place a responsibility and expectation on the public education, that we also see education is happening all around us every day, all day.
Okay, so you say that the institution plays a role, but however, the parents can be intentional about getting, electing the right officers who design these programs, parent groups you suggested. But the question I have is, what role does a parent play in terms of helping helping children to change their approach or their perspective when it comes on to education, knowing that there might be barriers? What role does the parent now play in terms of helping their children to sort of have a better attitude?
Well, I think I touched a little bit on it, but it's, for me, it's nurturing the interest and the love of learning. And so, as I said, that education is not just within the four walls of a classroom, that takes place. So if you're in your backyard or you're on your balcony, there's learning that takes place, and parents are the first educators of their children. And so that's an important premise, and that should be working in partnership with teachers and schools in order to continue to help our children to grow. So I think when you have and foster this interest in learning, that helps to create, I guess if you will, like an attitude of learning, a love of learning. Nurture what your children love, are interested in. And so, whatever that may be, it may be a short-term interest, it could be a longer-term interest. But that's why I'd mentioned earlier about, other opportunities to learn and examine things outside of the classroom. Those are things that are also important for students to help them in their learning lives.
Okay, the questions have been answered all. Okay, in your opinion, what does society lose when biases or lower expectations limit the opportunities of racialized groups within the educational institutions?
They A lot is lost. A lot of skills, abilities, expertise, talent, because people hold deficit views of particular groups. Uh, Black people, if we want to say specifically, for example, some of these deficit views then impede their institutions and organizations' ability to benefit and grow from that, which then also helps to contribute to society. And so it is a loss in many sense for organizations. And they need to see that there is a benefit to everyone in order to for the inclusion of people of different backgrounds and people who hold different perspectives. And so for in achieving that, that means making space. That means having people in leadership and who make decisions, who see the value of that and help to support and create culture and spaces in the organization in order to allow for that. And it's also, again, if we're thinking about living in an anti-racist world or community or country, that we have to identify and explicitly name what, what we're just talking about here, what we see taking place, where particular groups are targeted or excluded or marginalized because of their identity. And shift that, and that does require, that will require long-term changes and commitment, but that needs to happen in order, in order for us to see change and for our children to see change. I just, the question just brings to mind a Toni Morrison quote, or that an excerpt that I read recently, and I'm just paraphrasing, and she just, she says, it's not, it's not necessarily just about me being excluded, but that, you're robbing yourself of to be in my company, that you're losing out by not including me, by not thinking of me as being part of the whole. And so that's also another way to think of it as well.
What a perspective, not just to, you're saying they society loses when everyone is not included.
Yes.
Absolutely. Okay, switching gears a little bit. We are aware that success is not a straight road, and along the way there is setbacks. What was your greatest challenge in your journey so far to date, and how did you stay motivated to work through it?
So challenges or minor hiccups. For me, I don't know. I think for me, I look back and I may say, oh, something didn't necessarily happen when I wanted to or how I wanted to. But then when I look at where I am today, I will say, well, things happened the way that they were supposed to happen. When I think about the work that I'm doing now, going back to kind of, the beginnings of my work, there wasn't necessarily, I guess, a large audience for that. And so for me, I guess it wouldn't be like a huge obstacle, but getting people to be, bringing people into the fold, raising that awareness of what I was seeing and what I thought was important and what I knew could and should happen, took quite a bit of time. Also looking at, for me, the dual role, if you will, that I have, where I just see it as one role, but some people will say, well, are you a historian or are you an educator? But for me, they're intertwined and they're inseparable, because of who I am. And so how does that play out in terms of my next steps or career choices or educational choices? So that means there wasn't necessarily a clear path from A to B to do what it is that I do today. I've had to kind of carve that path out. And so that has and does take some time to do that. But driven by, my passion and my belief that things have happened, whether it's people being in my life at particular times or things happening, questions being raised at particular times, things have happened when they were supposed to, in order for, for my journey to take place the way that it did. And so I see it in that light.
Absolutely. I'm just thinking that there must be some vision. I'm looking back on your first book, Emancipation Day. What really inspired you to write that book? Like thinking about, what's happening. It's one of the greatest time in history for us. We could say, what inspired you to write that book?
Well, as I said, I was in conversation with publishers and, just kind of brainstorming some ideas. I was doing a lot more presentations around Black Canadian history and curriculum. And so the publishers, Natural Heritage Books then, which is now folded into Dundon Press, they were focusing on Black Canadian history. And so, we just had this conversation around, it would be nice to contribute a publication to this particular publishing house because of the focus. And so that's what we agreed would be a great choice to write about. And this conversation started at an Emancipation Day celebration in Owen Sound. And Owen Sound, by the way, they've had the longest consecutive Emancipation Day celebrations. And I don't think I get it right, but it may be this year 100 and I think maybe 57 years of consecutive Emancipation Day celebrations. So we were at an Emancipation Day celebration when this conversation took place. And so it really, as I said, things just happening at particular points in time, this conversation, this proposal, and that led to me writing the book.
Okay, so we have a lot of young adults, attendees on this webinar, and we want to know, what did you read as a young adult? Share with us. What were some of the books you read?
I read so much, and it would depend on, I think, my feeling or my mood at the time. So, when I shared about my questioning around Black history and whatnot, I would read, I've read Malcolm X, Philosophy of Marcus Garvey. I've read a lot of those Pan-African or Black Power movement, civil rights histories. But I've also, enjoyed reading mystery books. I've read, romance novels. At one point, I would read romance novels. So for me, it was just, if it's factual books, things that I could really learn from and absorb and help me to formulate my understanding. And then there were books that were books of, escape as well for me. So just reading a range of things, even, books around geography, going on to mystery. I said mystery books, and then crime books was another era of mine where I used to read a lot of books around crimes or unsolved mysteries and whatnot. So just a whole range of texts.
Okay, so we could see where the passion came from. It had to do with some of these books that you were reading. What book are you reading now?
Well, I should be reading more for my dissertation. So my reading right now is not solely about pleasure. I enjoy reading, but reading more for my researching and writing for my dissertation.
Okay. Well, I have aspiration of someday, writing a book. Okay, so how would you say, like, we have participant listening and we think writing is hard. What's the hardest part of writing a book, and how do we get past that? Because you've written 5. So
it's hard.
Sure.
and not to diminish it, but a couple of my books are writing for young people, so they're not like 500-page books. But it is hard, even depending on for either audience. It is, because if it's younger people, you want it to be simplified, but you want to make sure that you can convey the meaning of what you want to express to them, what you want them to learn. So it has to be very concise, very simple. But to write, like, say, a few sentences, you may have to read so much, write a lot, and then condense your thoughts. And so it really is a very involved experience of writing. And reading helps with your writing so that you do them in tandem. So doing a lot of reading, helping you to write. And so sometimes, writing, as I said, just writing a few sentences or writing a page may take some time. And so you develop some habits, some good, some not so good in terms of your writing process. Taking breaks, or some people like to write first thing in the morning, or some people like to write first thing or later in the evening. Just finding out what works for you. And this is applicable whether you're writing, I think, an essay, or, if you're writing something else, a blog post or whatever, but finding out what works for you. I also like to talk with friends and family, talk through things. That helps me to formulate my ideas as I'm writing them down, bouncing ideas. And I like to share my writing as well with people for their perspectives. And so, because people have different backgrounds, different interests, that help to raise questions or help you to further develop your writing, to communicate as effectively as you can.
Yeah, so before we transition to the Q&A section, this question I have to ask before we go. As a curriculum consultant, have you come across any gap in the education system? And what are your plans, or if so, what are your plans on changing that and moving forward?
Well, yes, there is a gap. A huge gap is that there isn't one thing that all students in Ontario have to learn about the 400-year presence of Black people here in Canada. So anything that is taught or is learned is based on the efforts of individual teachers. And we're speaking specifically as it relates to official curriculum in the classroom and in schools. So there isn't one thing. And that has been, for me, emblematic of the marginalization and the anti-Black racism, systemic anti-Black racism that we have been talking about. There's a long history of, again, community, parents, educators advocating for inclusion of expectations in the curriculum. And so that's something that I continue to advocate for. My master's research paper focused on analyzing the curriculum in terms of what we know, where Black people were positioned in that. There are some optional topics that are listed in the history, social studies curriculum in Ontario, but these are all options. These are nothing that, as I said, there isn't one specific thing that students have to learn. And so that really does create a huge gap in general understanding and public awareness of Black history, the long Black presence, the contributions of people of African descent here, and the issues that people of African descent face. And so for me, it's something that needs to be addressed through the official curriculum. Yes, it also means that there should be expectations of educators, of schools, and of school boards, but there is also an expectation, understanding again the history of anti-Black racism in public education. There should be an expectation of the government to address this particular thing that falls under their purview, and that the response to it, these demands, longstanding demands, also does convey what their thoughts are of their constituents. And so if we are in a moment, or in a moment of reckoning with the history of anti-Black racism, of recognizing the systemic disadvantage and outcomes in institutions such as education, that this needs to be part of the ways that they address anti-Black racism in education. And so that's something that I will continue to do. I will say that that's been the position of the Ontario Black History Society as well, which is one of the reasons why the organization formed 43 years ago this year. And last fall, we launched a campaign, our Blacked Out History campaign, and you'll find the video on our YouTube channel, which has been viewed thousands of times. And we worked with an agency, DDB Canada, to put together this video using a textbook. And we redacted everything except for what was mentioned about Black Canadian history. And what was left was mentions on 13 pages, not 13 full pages. And it was really designed to be a visual to illustrate the ways that Black history and the Black Canadian contributions are taken up or not taken up in classrooms. And also to call for, because we shared the textbook and a letter with the Ministry of Education, articulating our concerns, our observations, and to amplify, to reignite this conversation and the call for integration of specific learning expectations in the curriculum. And that is what we would like to see happen.
Change is coming.
Yes, and we have to push for that change. Yes.
Change is coming. Okay, so thank you so much, Natasha. It's not over yet. We know that the audience have their questions, and we are going to transition in our Q&A. So attendees, feel free to add your questions in the Q&A section, and I will now read them. Okay, so the first question, we have a question. Okay, here's the first question, Natasha. Will there be will there be a change to your book, Emancipation Day, that chronicles the efforts to finally have Emancipation Day recognized federally, so that this journey and the work that everyone who's contributed is not lost in history? Hope I read that question right.
So my first book, the Emancipation Day Celebrating Freedom in Canada, was just reprinted, and I made a brief addendum around Emancipation Day 2020 and included the efforts to have Bill M36 passed. And so that was just reprinted for February. My youth focused book on Emancipation Day, talking about freedom, will also be reprinted. And so I will have the opportunity in that text to most immediately recognize that the bill actually passed last week. So it's great that I'm working with a publisher who wants to reprint these texts, several of the titles that focus on Black Canadian history, to make them available. And so to be able to kind of, as you said, to kind of update them a little bit around some of the more recent happenings.
Okay. And another question is, if you had all the time and resources to write about Black Canadian history, what topic specifically would be your magnus opus?
So I would focus, it's hard to narrow, but I would focus a lot on Black women. The history of Black women is really has so many opportunities to document their history, and the contributions, the advocacy, the tenacity of Black women in Canada needs to be more documented. So I would want to focus on that one, and I always have to add in another. And the second one would be the experiences and the lives of Black children in history. That's another underwritten area of focus that I would like to write about.
Okay, just looking if we, okay, so there is a question. They would want to, okay, let me see where the next, they want to know about a little bit more about your first book. We spoke about it already, but okay. We could hold that question for a second. As a community member, is it possible to create a proposal on a specific learning outcome for the inclusion of Black Canadian history and contributions?
Well, I think if I can just kind of broaden that question maybe to around, advocating for, supporting the advocacy of inclusion in the curriculum. I think that that's important, that parents and community members, not just Black parents, all parents, advocate for a curriculum that better represents their communities and the composition of Canada and their communities as well. The curriculum goes through a process, where educators and experts and other people do review, and they give feedback on that. And so I think it's part of a healthy process to have the voices of different stakeholders, helping to identify what some of those expectations could look like. And so I would like to see more than the one expectation. I would like to see expectations from primary going into high school, and I will focus, for example, on the history, and social studies and geography curriculum as a prime focus for history, but that there's also integration in other curricular areas as well. And so it really is, with a lot of conversation taking place around Black experiences, around curriculum, that everyone needs to lend their voice. And just as a quick aside, that there's conversations taking place around the curriculum revisions in Alberta, that the Alberta government has undertaken, and parents and communities have expressed their concerns in the direction that the government wants to take that curriculum in. And so we all need to be aware of what our children are learning or what's being taught, and to express our concerns and our support for those changes.
Okay. All right. In the meantime, while we're waiting for the other questions, okay, is there anything that you'd like to share with us that we haven't yet mentioned, that you'd like to share? Anything that you think we as a Black community should know as it relates to education that you haven't yet shared?
I would say that it talks a little bit about opportunities, but I do want to say that there are a lot of Black organizations that are doing tremendous work to offer support and resources for Black communities, whether it's the Jamaica Canadian Association and the tutorial services that they have, the NIA Center for the Arts offering extracurricular programs, even online during COVID, for students to participate in extracurricular, get some of their volunteer hours. These are just two of many organizations, who are doing so much to help support young people that we can tap into. There's the Parents of Black Children, another newer organization just doing amazing work, again, to advocate for Black children and to offer supports and resources for Black parents that we can tap into. And then there are organizations or institutions that are taking a targeted approach to offer opportunities for Black students as well. That, for example, U of T has a science medical program geared towards Black and Indigenous students, that's a great opportunity. That's helping to build on the conversation, help to rectify the lower presence of Black students in the medical program at U of T. There's been a conversation for a number of years around that. Queen's University just recently launched a program similar as well. So there are these opportunities that we could take advantage of. And I always try to share them. The Ontario Black History Society tries to share them as well. And then I would also say, obviously, to speak about the Ontario Black History Society, of which I'm the president, that we continue to do and to build on a history of doing a great work, documenting history, but also providing resources and support We've worked with other organizations as well during this time of COVID to offer community support where we can. One quick example is supporting the great effort of the JCA at the beginning of the pandemic to deliver meals to elderly people in our community. And so we are also an organization that you can take a look at in terms of our efforts as well.
Okay, so there's a lot of changes being made, as you said. Okay, so there's another question. I'm going to read it. So, what have you found to be the most challenging task to getting Black Heritage Edition made to the current curriculum? What has been the pushback or concern to change, if any?
So the work that I do is, I guess, multifold. So in one sense, as I just talked about, I advocate for integration in the curriculum. So specific expectations in the official curriculum developed by the government. But then I also do work creating curriculum resources and supporting the curriculum instruction in classrooms with school boards and teachers, because they also need to be doing that work as well. It doesn't have to wait for a directive from from the government in order to do that. That's part of the work of teaching to the students who are in our classroom, recognizing the human rights of the students who are in our schools. And so I support that work as well. One of the things that, so there's challenges because the norm, or whiteness as the norm, exists because people have maintained these structures. And so there's efforts to maintain the status quo. People then will raise concerns to say, well, if this is done for one group or your group, then what does it mean for other groups? Which is, that's not a reasonable rationale, because we really should be decentering one particular narrative and making space to integrate stories and experiences of other groups. So there's that. There's also the realities that educators who are in the classroom today have also gone through this very same system of not learning anything about, for example, Black Canadian history. So they also are not aware. And so that means that there's a lot of work to be done by individuals and by the system to ensure that teachers are receiving support, professional learning opportunities, and the resources in order to make these changes as well. But I will say that there are so many educators who have always done this work, who are doing this work, and want to do this work as well. Those who are even newer to it want to do this work and spend a lot of their time to try to make that happen. And so it's kind of meshing everything together, the individual efforts and enhancing the systemic efforts and change in order to make that happen on a wider scale.
Okay, all right. We know that there might be members from an organization watching. So, do you have any suggestions what people can do who consider themselves to be an ally, do beyond just educating themselves on historical inequities to help racialized group?
Well, so I think I raised one issue a little while ago. So helping to lend your voice to concerns. I think in the broader scheme of things, we want to see better and more injustice in our society. And that's not just going to happen. We all have to play a role in pushing for that change. And so, it could mean lending your voice. Is it a letter of support? Is sending an email? Is it, supporting organizations who are leading some of this work, giving donations, giving a volunteering time, speaking up when you see things that are, are not just. and raising those issues. That's, it's important for us to name and identify things that are taking place and to work collaboratively, to work in community with others who are also working towards change. Those are some of the things that that we can do.
Thank you so much, Natasha. I'm looking on the on our agenda. We have come to an end. You've given us more than we asked for. We've gotten some insights, some knowledge, some action steps on what we can do to move forward as a Black community. And I just want to share with the attendees, I want to thank the attendees for investing the time to be here, to invest in learning more about Canadian Black history. And I will send in the chat the feedback form. So please do us a favor, fill it out before you leave. And I want to tell you about our upcoming Fireside Chat events. As you could see, we have on April 8th, Shannon, and on April 15th, we have Quentin Versetti. So as you could see, want to thank you again for coming and sharing, asking questions and participating. We will now close off the session.
And I just wanted to say thank you. And, you can learn more about the Ontario Black History Society on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and on our website. You will have a great conversation with Shannon, my dear friend and Vice President of the OBHS, and just encourage you to continue to learn and to support one another as we continue to move forward. So thank you so much, Lionel. It's been a pleasure speaking with you today, and for BASE to continue the great work that they're doing for Humber College students.
Thank you. Thank you, Natasha.